Hello and welcome to Elia's Doodles. It's my first video in a while, but I'm going to be doing a winter reef, so if that's something you want to see, then carry on watching. So I'm starting off by looking at the flowers and planning out the circles in them, because that's the easiest way to do flowers, I find, and then I go in and add detail as an extra, and then that just gives me a bit of a base point to start off of. With the petals, you want to make sure they're all different because no flower is perfect and symmetrical, so making sure that they're different and have a bit of a curve will give that extra realism that you're going for. Not that this is necessarily realistic, but it gives it the right shape. Using watercolour, you want to make sure you plan the colours out before and you put a bit of a base layer down. You've got to remember that you can't add any lighter tones, so you always want to start off with that. There's two techniques with watercolour, it's either wet on wet or wet on dry, so I decided to do a bit of both. This bit here I'm using a wet on dry technique, so I get a bit of a crisper line. You especially want to use wet on dry when you're putting darker colours on, so like the middle of the flower, if that was wet it would all blend out. So to the pen bit, I'm using the Unipin pens. I think I'm using 0.4 and 0.2, but the 0.2 just died out halfway through. I go through them like there's no tomorrow. But all I'm doing here is outlining it and then adding in little lines for detail. I was kind of going for more of a retro vibe with this drawing, and I kind of liked the plan, so I went on to do the winter reef. As you can see here, I'm just laying down my first base layer. I decided to not use any pencil for the petals because I wanted to give it a more organic look, and I sometimes just like freestyling it. I mean, I've got the plan next to me, so I've always got a reference to look back to. With leaves, it's always nice to add a little bit of a gap in between so you can distinguish between them. It's also good to add with the petals, but I just decided to go straight in. If you're not using pen, this is a really good technique to break apart the colour. And trying to not get my head in the shot because I keep doing that. So here you can see that the yellow petals have, the yellow base colours dried, and I'm adding in the petals. I'm doing this again on wet on dry so it doesn't blend because I want to give a more distinguished look between the petals. And yeah, just going in with a thin brush and making sure that they all kind of are different and uneven, which is pretty easy because it's really hard to draw symmetrical petals. With the wooded kind of side to the reef, I just went in and added in darker tones because I wanted it to look all intertwined and kind of rustic. So I just went in and just added the lines. I kind of just done a dark tone and then just tried to blend it out with water so it didn't look too harsh. And that's kind of literally all I done, and then I go over it in pen later on. As you see, I'm kind of leaving the wood bit and going on to add the berries, and like that's okay to jump about in the painting. If you're kind of getting bored of one section, then just go off and do something else and come back to it a bit later on. That's absolutely fine. And I also added some brown to the leaf because I didn't want it to look too spring-like because it is hot chocolate weather, as the writing says. So going back to the petals, I'm just going in and added some orange because my reference had orange in there and I wanted to make them have more depth and more kind of colour. I also wanted to add a bit of the darkness in, even though it was still a little bit wet. If you kind of don't add too much water, it won't blend out too much, and you can kind of control that. And if you do get a bit of sort of blended out colour, just clean your brush and make sure that it's wet, and you can almost wipe it away, and then you can always just use a tissue to take away the excess. So when I plan out my reefs, I always have a reference picture, whether that's from Pinterest, Instagram, anywhere, and I tend to combine the two because there's certain aspects that I like. I really love these ribbons that were on most of the kind of autumn reefs. I thought they were so cute, so I just go in and add some grey to it to give a bit of depth. That's such a nice way to add really subtle kind of contrast and texture. The last part of the painting process is just adding in the text, and I quite like doing this with a brush because it gives it more of an organic feel, but I'm kind of really happy with how the calligraphy turned out because it is definitely my weakest point, but it just says hot chocolate weather because it's very true. So after doing the watercolour and letting it dry, I do add a little bit of pencil kind of texture just to give it a little bit of depth, but I didn't do too much on this one. I felt I didn't need it. The colouring pencils that I use are just Derwent Academy ones, and it's like 24 for £12, so they're just kind of cheap and cheerful ones. Okay, so the last part of the drawing process is just adding on the pen, and that's literally it. So I'm just kind of outlining it and then adding the more detailed strokes in. I decided to just use the 0.4 pen, and if I just sort of tilt it on the side, it gives a thinner line, and that worked a lot better for me. I tend to press really hard and just kind of ruin all my pens straight away, so if you guys know any kind of better ones that last a bit longer than the Unipin pens, then leave it in the comments because that would be a lifesaver for me. And then yeah, that's literally all I do, and my camera cut out and I didn't realise, so I haven't got much of the pen process, but yeah.